Dear Tony, thank you so much for your time and availability to meet and talk with me.
It's a real pleasure, Antonio. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Tony, allow me to begin with this conversation with my surprise when going through the process of learning about you and your work. In fact, the amount of printed and video recording that you have published on your website is not just remarkable, but a wonderful window on your life contribution journey on scouting and Freemasonry. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Allow me to say you actually make my life quite simple because a lot of information that I can use for meeting and sharing thoughts with you. Tony, during our conversation, introduction conversation, you told me that you joined the Scouts before Freemasonry. Can you tell our audience how the journey in 1968 start?
Thank you, Antonio. Yes, I can, and it's very easy. My parents were both involved in scouting. So it's a nice little story, actually. It's a story of romance.
Really?
They were both involved in scouting. My father was a Rover Scout, and this was in southeast London. And he was involved in Rover Scouting, which in those days, in the 50s, was an older section. My mother was you'll laugh at this, a lady cub master. Now, why a lady cub master? Well, it's very simple. Cubs, the sort of 8 to 10 and a half, 11-year-olds, are far too young to have mistresses. So the story is they were both involved in scouting, and friends of theirs, friends of my father and friends of my mother, were both dating each other, to use the language of the day.
Yeah.
And they were introduced to each other at a scouting event. So sometime in the early 50s, my mother and father met each other wearing their scout uniforms at a scout event.
Wow.
They started dating themselves. The rest is history. I was born in 1959, and it was part of my upbringing. Scouting was just part of my upbringing. So I really wanted to join the scouting at the earliest possible time, which was, in my case, back then, was when I was 8 years old, and I did it as soon as I possibly could. And I've been a member of the Scouts ever since.
Well, actually, can you tell us which values did scouting introduce you to, and how have those values shaped your life journey?
That's a great question, Antonio. Scouting has really been it's provided me with my moral code. Scouting has always been, if you like, the backbone of my life. And at different points in my life, it's to scouting that I've turned, if you like, for the sort of my moral compass. And that's largely because scouting is a values-based organisation. It's aimed at young people, and it provides them with activities, fun, adventure, with skills for life, but all built around a moral code, a set of values. And those values are expressed in what is known as the Scout Law. And the Scout Law has always been my guidance. If I repeat it, please forgive me, but I think it says a lot about what scouting stands for. First of all, a scout, anybody who's in scouting, whether you're 8 years old or 89 years old, or nowadays you can join much younger even, but anybody involved in scouting, a scout is to be trusted. Fantastic. A scout is loyal. A scout is friendly and considerate. A scout belongs to the worldwide family of scouts. And these are fantastic values. They've always acted as something for me to aspire to. A scout has courage in all difficulties. Courage, as a boy, that really appealed to me. The idea of, courage, being a courageous person, something to live up to. A scout makes good use of time and is careful of possessions and property. That's always been very important to me. And finally, a scout has self-respect and respect for others. So they're the values that I've learned through scouting. And they're the values that I try to live my life by. And to this day, I still aspire to live up to them. Interestingly, to the outside world, we tend to express those in a slightly simpler term. If we want to summarize Scouting's values, today we talk about integrity, respect, care, belief, and cooperation. And what is interesting, and I know you probably want to come on to this, they are very similar to Freemasonry's values.
You're just making my life easy for the next one. Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this story about your parents. Is brilliant, and the fact that you are still today active in Scouting says quite a lot of the impact that this organization has had in your life. So
can I comment?
Please.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt you, Antonio, but I'm so enthusiastic about this. And if I can just comment on that last point, Scouting has meant so much to me and has done so much good for me over my life that one of the reasons I'm still actively involved, apart from the fun and enjoyment and friendships that I get from it still, but one of the reasons I'm still actively involved is I sincerely believe I can never repay Scouting for the good it's done me.
We will come back 1 second to Scouting. Now, allow me to get back to the closing of the previous sentence. 1968 begins Scouting. We fast forward 23 years. It's 1991. Your Masonic journey starts. How did that happen?
Well, you see, here's the connection to Scouting. So, yes, I was initiated into Freemasonry in 1991. But it was actually a 5-year journey. In the mid-80s, I read a couple of books, one by Stephen Knight, and which were very highly critical of Freemasonry. And I read these two books, and they're well-known books. I couldn't believe what they were saying about Freemasonry. It didn't seem credible. And in fact, one of the books mentioned somebody whom I know by name, somebody who I considered to be not a close friend, but somebody I knew and who I considered to be a good person, a person of integrity. And so I became interested. I couldn't believe what these books were saying about Freemasonry. So I started to investigate it, and I found that I had a number of friends who were Freemasons. And funnily enough, they were also involved in Scouting. So over a period of time, and it took me 5 years of discussion and reflection and consideration. But at the end of that, I felt that Freemasonry was something I wanted to join and become involved with. And I actually joined a lodge which was founded for Scouters, for adult members of the Scouts.
I see.
And so I was initiated into the Scout Lodge of Derbyshire, that's Pioneer Lodge number 9065, in 1991. And I was initiated at a meeting held on Scout premises at the Scout Training Centre in Derbyshire.
Fantastic.
And in fact, I am a trainer in Derbyshire still. So it was a building I knew, but it was a meeting held under dispensation. And we were all wearing Scout uniforms. So I was wearing my Scout uniform at my initiation.
You actually somehow managed to introduce my next question. I hope the audience will appreciate this, because I have to say, going through your material, talking with you, every time I hear you making a reference, is not a casual reference. There is hard work, there is analysis, there is research. And that is one of the things that actually impressed me going through the material that you work, Tony, sincerely. Every word or everything that you wrote looks like carefully crafted to pass and share an experience or a discovery or a thought that you reached. Can you describe your process of learning a new subject?
That's a really helpful and interesting question, because you were good enough to send me an indication of what you wanted to ask me beforehand, and this really got me thinking. And So I've sort of looked back over one or two areas where I've spent some time learning something new, and yeah. I mean, I'm an educator. I've lived my life trying to help other people learn, and so it's always useful to look at, well, how do I learn? You know, what's my process? And I'm trying to learn new things all the time. So this was a really helpful question for me. And I think the first thing is something has to interest me. You know, I don't wait for other people to teach me. I research. I look for things. So the first thing is there has to be a spark. Something has to inspire me, or there has
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
be a question or an issue that I feel is unresolved. And so interest is the first step. The second step is I'm fundamentally a scientist by training and by thinking. So I'm interested in evidence, and I'm interested in primary evidence. So I look for sources. I look to go back to the original author or the original data. And it's interesting, having spent my life approaching things from a scientific perspective. As I get more interested in, as I've developed more of an interest in history and undertaken historical research myself, I approach it in the same way. So I look for primary evidence, original data, not what other people have said over the years. I try to go back to the original sources. And then, of course, I read. I read different people, different books on a similar subject, and I try because I'm an extrovert and I like to engage with other people. I try to discuss those topics with others and see what other people's perspective is. And you know, lastly, I spend a lot of time thinking, contemplating, reflecting, and I think this is, you know, something that Freemasonry has helped me to learn, because I'm not I'm not naturally a quiet, shy, retiring, introverted person. Um, and I'm a very impatient person. Impatience is my, you know, one of my worst qualities. But learning to contemplate, learning to reflect, learning to be still, be quiet, to really think something through and look for the deeper meaning of something is something that Freemasonry and learning of its ritual has taught me.
Can you give us an example or anecdote about any subject in Freemasonry that you were busy with, and that information took you off guard or surprised you and just led you into or lead you into actually looking into more details about that one?
Um, I can, and I'm sure there's a number of examples, and certainly one or two ceremonies have you know, really opened my eyes, and I thought, wow, that's interesting or different. Um, but actually, I think the thing that has stood out for me is when I learned that that this is all about membership and membership growth.
Yeah.
The thing that stood out for me is when I learned that the key to membership growth in Freemasonry is not about finding more candidates or initiating more people. When I learned what the real data is, when I learned what the real numbers were over an extended period of time, the discovery that the key to membership growth is not about finding more candidates, it's about keeping the candidates we bring in. And the key data for me was looking at United Grand Lodge's initiations and resignations data for a 10-year period. And the 10-year period that I always quote, or certainly that I quote up to now,
Yeah.
the 10 years to the end of 2019.
Yeah.
And the reason I mean, I have data more recent than that, but the reason I quote that period is because it's pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And COVID has skewed this data. And you know, we need to allow things to recover, and to get back to the underlying truth of initiations and resignations. But here is the real data that really surprised me, and it made a big difference to my outlook to this and my work on membership and
Yeah.
membership growth. In the 10 years to the end of 2019, just over 86,000 men joined Freemasonry. In the same period, 122,000 resigned.
Wow.
Now, when you look at the data year by year, the number of resignations is coming down each year. And that's great, because that suggests that some of the things we've been doing in that time are having an effect. The number of initiations are also coming down, but more slowly. So resignations are coming down more quickly. And that's great, because eventually they'll converge. But they won't converge for another 15 years. And the real importance of this data and is this: the key to membership growth is to fix the reasons why people leave. And I believe, and this is where we need to get more and more data, but I believe that the reason people leave, and unfortunately the spike the spike in terms of when people leave, is at an early stage in their Masonic journey, not long after they join us.
So within the first to the third degree.
Yes, yes. So we know that there's a high percentage of people who leave before they even get their Grand Lodge certificate. We know that if we can keep people for 8 years, then we're likely to have commitment for many years to come. We know that if people join the Royal Arch and other orders, that they're more, we could say they're more sticky, they're more committed, they're more likely to stay.
I see.
The key seems to me to be keeping people in those early years. And it seems to me, and this is backed up by various other data, qualitative data included, seems to me that many people join, find themselves in some way disappointed, in some way Freemasonry or their lodges are not satisfying their early expectations, are not satisfying their reasons to join. And in some cases, we know that this is down to the practices in the lodge, or the culture in the lodge, or the behaviors of some members in the lodge. And this is why I've developed my concept of the leaky bucket. If we could encourage lodges to fix their leaky buckets, to look at why are people leaving this lodge? What do we have to do to satisfy the expectations of new members who are joining our lodges today in the 21st century? If we can understand those expectations better, if we can provide a more member-centric approach to Freemasonry, something that satisfies those individual needs, then perhaps we can retain, one, it'll help us bring in the right people. Two, it'll help us retain them. And then once we can retain and engage them, then we can lead to stronger and healthier lodges. So for me, it all starts with lodges looking at themselves, understanding that why people might be leaving this lodge, fixing that before then looking for new members. And that
is it a plausible question to say, does Freemasonry still have a meaning today? Considering that somebody that comes in is so disappointed that actually leaves before the end of the third journey?
I think it's a great question. And I think, yes, it is very relevant today. It still has wonderful meaning. It's timeless meaning. And we know that many people, most people stay. Most people do stay in Freemasonry, and many people continue to have wonderful experiences of Freemasonry. But too many are not staying.
Yeah.
And my belief is not that it's Freemasonry that is at fault. It's not Freemasonry, its values, its landmarks, its ritual, which need to change. What we need to do is update the way we manage our lodges, the way we communicate with people, the way we help and support people, the way we involve people in decision making. Yeah. We need to make our lodges, we need to introduce 21st century methods of managing lodges so that the membership experience suits the mindset, the lifestyles, if you like, the psychology of 21st century people, the people who are working today.
So we live in like you mentioned, a 24/7 connected society. Giving the time to explain subject discuss content, and allow the individual to go through the thinking process is shorter and shorter. Many candidates today and members they Google, they watch videos from various platforms. During the COVID-19, there has been an explosion of Masonic material that was put on YouTube or other different platforms. And unfortunately, often some of this material that can be questionable is fashionable, and that creates traffic to that website. And then there are I'm aware of WhatsApp group of Freemason from all over the world and so on. Now, question is, because I think we go back to what you were describing at the beginning of this conversation: values, something that is so deeply rooted in the pure meaning of scouting or Freemasonry. How can actually we teach and share those values, or maintain those values, or let them stay pure in existing new and future members, when we can't control the overwhelming amount of lies, baseless content, material that is made with the purpose of destroying rather than building and maintaining traditions?
And it's interesting. I often get asked when I'm delivering talks, why is it that the media get away with writing the ridiculous stuff they do about Freemasonry? Why is it that script writers include into their scripts silly stories about Freemasonry? How can they get away with it? Well, we don't control them. We have no right to control them.
Yeah.
So all of this material is out there. And for me, the thing is, the only thing we can do is be true to ourselves, be true to what we stand for, and be good role models, be good examples to others. And if we act as Freemasons, if we act according to our values, and if we communicate the fact that we are Freemasons to others, then I'm not saying we will eventually get rid of the conspiracies or the lies or the myths, but it does mean that the people in our own networks will be able to at least see us and say, well, I know a Freemason and he's a good guy and he lives by what he stands for and he's a man of integrity. So we can only do that. We can only control what is within our own domain, within our own circle of our influence. And I'm minded of a line from the Address to the Master on his installation, where we talk about proving to the world the happy and beneficial effects of our ancient and honourable institution. It's for us individually, perhaps not to prove to the whole world, but to demonstrate to those within our circle of influence what Freemasonry means to us.
I'm going to test your knowledge, Tony.
Oh dear.
Let's see how it's going to work. Great ritual and ceremony. Good management. Active support for newer members. Engagement of all members. Distinctive features that evolve. Harmony. Leadership, energy, and enthusiasm. Okay, that's a long one. Let me summarize it. The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Lodges, the title of your latest book. Now, can you tell us, I think quite a lot has already been touched, because in the way that you were describing some of the examples lead me to understand that, but what drove you to write this book?
About 2010, I developed the first version of this talk, the 7 Habits of Highly Successful Lodges. And those habits I've, if you like, tweaked and polished over the years. The first one was a bit like a rough ashlar. And as I've got more experience and more visits and more insight, I've polished those into closer towards a perfect ashlar. I then wrote an article for the Square magazine in about 2013. And Lewis Masonic at the time asked me whether I would write a book based upon these 7 habits. And they actually commissioned me. And I started work on a book back then. And then in early 2015, I was involved by this time with a working group at United Grand Lodge. It was a a subgroup of the membership focus group. And the membership focus group was chaired by Right Worshipful Brother Ray Reid, who at the time was the deputy president of the Board of General Purposes. So I was involved in a subgroup there, and a piece of work I did for that subgroup, I was asked to look at how different organizations, different membership organizations, acquired new members. So I did some research, and I looked at what we did in scouting, and I'd been involved in that work for the national body for scouting. And I looked at one or two other organizations, and I came to the conclusion that what we should do is develop a pathway into membership. And Ray and his group asked me to develop this, and that's how the members pathway was developed. And I became, I worked on the development of the scheme itself, but also on the content. And I wrote a lot of the content for the members pathway. By doing that, it took me off from the 7 Habits. So I parked the 7 Habits project for a while.
Yep.
And worked on the development of the members pathway, and that took me to I think the end of 2020, when I left the group that is responsible for the members pathway. So in 2021, I returned to the 7 Habits project and looked at it slightly differently. The 7 Habits I polished, as I say, and I started looking at how can we introduce the 7 Habits. How can we promote the 7 Habits? And I came to the conclusion that what we needed to do was to help lodges to modernize the way they manage it for the 21st century Freemason. And that's what the book is about. The subtitle is A Guide to Managing Lodges in the 21st Century.
Is the future of Freemasonry now changed? Are we going to move into a hybrid model or even fully digital in, pretty short term? What's your opinion, Tony?
That's a great question. Let me start my answer. Crises accelerate change.
Very true. Very true.
So you're absolutely right when you say that COVID accelerated our consideration of these things, and it was, when I reflect on my experience in during the COVID pandemic. For medical reasons, I was shielding for 15 months.
Yeah.
And we very quickly went into this virtual space and using video conferencing. And video conferencing was something I had some familiarity with from a professional point of view. I was using it a little bit with some of my clients, and certainly found it very useful. Now, I'm an educator. I'm involved in adult training, learning and development, and in my almost 40 years working in that world, I've seen the introduction of e-learning, self-directed learning, and I remember when we first started with e-learning, everybody said, "Well, everything's going to move on to this," and it was like a pendulum had shifted. The pendulum was swinging from face-to-face learning to online learning. And of course, the pendulums then move back, and eventually they find a balance. And I think it was a little bit the same with COVID. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, we could do so much if we move everything online." And I've even noticed on social media, there are people claiming to be Freemasons, but they exist in the virtual world, not the physical. Now, my belief is, as with all things, a blended approach can be very beneficial. In other words, instead of trying to enforce extremes, let's take advantage of opportunities that are provided by different ways of engaging with each other. But for me, there are certain things that you can do in a virtual world, and certain things that you can do in a physical world.
Yeah.
And there are certainly, for me, there are some things which you can only do in one or the other. So I believe that a Masonic meeting, a lodge meeting, is a sealed environment where people join together in the same physical space to help each other contemplate, learn, and develop. That sealed environment is very important to me. The relationship between the tiler and the inner guard, and a double lock that they create.
Yeah.
I believe that when we're in a lodge meeting, we should not have a connection to the outside world, that networks connections should be shut off.
Yeah.
So I believe that a Masonic meeting should be physical space, one-to-one. Sorry, not one-to-one. Let me start that again. I believe that an open tiled lodge meeting should be with a group of people together in the same physical space. Now, all of that said, a lodge meeting is only part of our Masonic experience. There are lots of other opportunities for us to come together as Freemasons and to learn and to support each other. And those can all happen in a virtual space, whether it's a committee meeting or an opportunity to share our interpretation of some reading from ritual or books or whatever, or online learning. I still do a lot of online talks. During the COVID pandemic, I delivered over 140 online talks to
Wow.
audiences around the world. And there were different platforms that were engaging me and other speakers. So it was a great opportunity to get to a much bigger audience. Until the COVID pandemic, the biggest Masonic audience I'd ever had was about 200 people in Johannesburg, South Africa. In a lodge meeting there that I delivered a talk to. Within a short space of time, during the COVID pandemic, I was delivering to 800 or 900 people at a time over Zoom meetings. So I'm a great believer in using technology to enhance, to add to complement the physical meetings that we have as Freemasons. So I'm not a believer in one extreme or the other. I'm a believer that those things that need to be done face to face should be done face to face. Those things that can be done in a virtual world, let's do in a virtual world.
Yeah.
Naturally, I'm a member of some lodges in South Africa. I can now participate in meetings with them, not lodge meetings, not a tiled lodge meeting, but I can participate in committee meetings or social get-togethers over Zoom or Teams or whatever.
Yeah,
in a way that I couldn't before. So there's a place for all of this.
Tony, I have two final questions. And this time I go back to putting you under the spotlight. So be ready for it. You're an author, you're a researcher, like you said, you love to get engaged and look into something. So for our audience, and we will not share it with anybody else, are you working on a new book? And what is the subject?
Yes, I am. I have a number of thoughts or embryonic projects underway at the moment. One is a lodge history that I should have completed 3 years ago, and I haven't. So apologies to that lodge. I won't name the lodge. Apologies. Second, I have 2 follow-ups to the 7 Habits book. And thirdly, I have a new series of talks. I have a new series of Masonic writing that at the moment exists as talks, but I'm actually thinking might be better if I went straight to print with them as a book.
Last question, last and final. I promise. I won't keep you.
I'm enjoying this. It's okay.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and one of the luxury I have in meeting authors like you, but Freemason or scouts like you are, Tony, is that I actually am fascinated by the capability of inspiring others. I mean, you've been scout now since 1968. How many generations of scouts can actually look at Tony and say, this is why I'm doing this? And the same thing actually will be about Freemasonry. But this is giving an image of you as the inspiring source for others. What does inspire Tony in 2023?
Interesting question. So if I go back in time, the people who inspired me were people who'd been before me. You know, senior Freemasons, people involved in scouting who'd been doing what I'm doing now, but you know, had come before. Interestingly, the people who inspire me now are the people who are following.
Ah,
So it's the younger generations. The people who inspire me now are the young people in scouting who just grab the opportunities with such energy, and who have, you know, who are champions of diversity and inclusivity. My daughter inspires me. She's 26 years old. She's a trainee solicitor. She's a law graduate and a psychology graduate. She's a
she
scout
too.
leader.
She's
Yes,
continuing the tradition. Fantastic.
absolutely. She inspires me by the way she champions other people, and our understanding of other people, and her approach to inclusivity. Um, and within Freemasonry, the people who inspire me are actually our light blues. So within one of my provinces, I have an active role that includes oversight of our light blues club for new Freemasons. And I have been involved in relaunching that club and turning it into a self-governing light blues club. And I act as a bit like the sort of housemaster, or you know, venture scout leader for them.
Yeah.
What nowadays we'd call it a scout leader, the sort of older mentor, as it were. But they're self-governing, and they're doing a fantastic job, and they're so enthusiastic, and they support each other in their Masonic journey. The club complements what lodges can do by providing a network of people across provinces who are all at a similar stage in their Masonic journey. And the reason they inspire me is I can see in them our future Masonic leaders. They're the people who will be leading our lodges, our provinces, and our Grand Lodge in years to come. And I'm very optimistic about the future. I believe our younger generation, our newer Freemasons, have great capacity, and if we can support them, if we can empower them, and if we can make sure that they have the opportunity to run our lodges sooner rather than later, and those of us who've been doing it for a while stand aside and act as mentors and supporters, I believe that we'll have Freemasonry fit for the 21st century and fit for the future. So it's the younger people who are inspiring me today.
Hey, hey, brilliant. I really love this answer. Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate it. Tony, unfortunately, time is running out. I will keep on talking, and hopefully we will have, the possibility to talk at the next release of your book. But it has been a true pleasure and honor meeting with you, learning about your work, and actually learning to how you put your creativity at work for both the Scouts and Freemasonry. Really, really an honor meeting you.
Antonio, that's really kind of you. So very kind. You've given me some excellent questions, which have really made me think. You've given me an audience, and for that I thank you. It's been a privilege and a great pleasure speaking with you
Thank you,
today.
Tony.
And thank you for the time that you've put into it.
Much appreciated and my pleasure. And look forward to our next opportunity to meet again, Tony.
Wonderful.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye bye.